Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma pleure sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Trump administration, we've seen people that work for the president just get berated when they're at restaurants with their families, when they're out and about trying to get in their car, when they're at universities. And it happened again. There were demonstrators that were outside of a school in Syracuse because Ivanka Trump was there and they were chanting, shame. What about the children? What's your reaction? Because the left is staying silent on this. Other than the protesters, you don't see the left, most of the left leaders aren't saying we shouldn't be doing this.
And that's what I find most problematic. And as you guys know, that I've had my own experiences with this. Mine was actually a physical confrontation. Luckily, it was just water.
To you. That's right.
My real problem is when this goes beyond heckling, harassment, water, intimidation, how much worse is it going to get? And what is it going to take for the leaders in the Democratic Party and on the left to stand up against what's happening and to put the message out that this is unacceptable? Because it's going to get worse. The final stages of Trump derangement syndrome aren't just heckling and harassment. They're going to be physical confrontations. And I truly don't believe that that's what the Democratic Party wants for conservatives, is for us to be attacked. But they need to make that very clear, because until then, there are many of their followers and supporters who do think it's okay to do these things. They think it's their right and they think it's their duty, and that's dangerous.
Well, what do you think the end game is? Is it just to berate somebody, film it, put it on YouTube and make them look bad, or what?
Well, that's part of it. I know, at least in my experience, it was done to be filmed and it was done to put out on social media because people want to be famous or infamous for attacking conservatives. But beyond that, when we have people like Maxine Waters coming out and urging her followers and her supporters to harass conservatives and Trump supporters, there are those that are listening to her that feel it is their right and their duty, as I said, to harass Trump supporters. They feel validated in that. And we have other Democratic leaders and those on the left that throw out terms like Nazi, racist, white supremacist, willy-nilly. That is dangerous because they are putting it out there that it is okay to attack conservatives because they must be bad people. That's wrong.
Right. I think it's also important, too, is that almost no one is going to be serving in government for any side if there's going to be continue to worry about your own security. When I saw Michael Flynn being heckled as he left the courtroom yesterday by people knowing that he gave 33 years of his life for the country and what he did in Iraq and Afghanistan specifically, you realize we got to a very dangerous time.
Well, it just shows the weakness of their arguments and their inability to articulate their political beliefs when they have to resort to harassment and heckling. I think it's honestly beneath the Democratic Party, and I hope that someone stands up and says enough is enough.
It is Thursday, the 12th of July of 2018, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special, folks, is Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. Yes, right, a little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. Hey, Tomi Lahren, you can't wait until someone stands up to the dirty liberals? How dare they express themselves in the public square? How dare they? I love the allusion to that traitor, Mike Flynn. Yeah, all of his service in the military in Afghanistan, he's a traitor. I don't see much amenable attitudes towards Strzok, who actually brought Russians to heel. You know that TV show, The Americans? Yeah, it's about the people that Strzok busted. Spies in our midst, here for decades. No wonder they wanted to get rid of that guy. But McConnell being heckled, I wouldn't call it heckling. I mean, when a woman at a birthday party at a park wearing a Puerto Rico t-shirt is harassed by a white racist and cops stand by, now that is heckling. I mean, come on, let's get real, Tomi. Yeah. And we think that all right-wingers are bad people. Not all of you. I mean, there might be a couple that, might be able to be saved. But for the most part, I think right-wing white conservatives are filled with racial animosity, xenophobia, and, let's be clear, an abject ignorance of American government, American history, and America. Okay? They don't care. They live in their tight little silo. And things only make sense in that tiny little silo. Some can be saved. I agree. Some might be able to be saved. But for the most part, there's no reaching across the aisle. That's been done before. Oh, I forgot another one of those aspects of the right-wing white. They have no memory. Every day is a new day. Got to reinvent the wheel. All right. Well, and Trump's trying to blow up NATO. We'll see. I think NATO might be a little bit stronger than that. And I also suspect that Europe knows that the proverbial shit is about to hit that fan. Just wait it out. We have a system in place in which there's really a regular rule of succession without violence. Isn't it amazing? And I think Europe figures that we still have that in place. We'll see. I don't know, though. We do have a House of Lords called the Senate. We'll be talking about their input into generations of our government and a few other things. In fact, why don't we get into the rest of the menu? Well, finishing up here in the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, HHS Secretary Azar boasted that separating immigrant families is one of the great acts of American generosity. Well, it is, because, all those conservative Cult 45 white people just love the fact that brown and black people are getting kicked. How dare they take our stuff? An ICE agent taunted a refugee mom with Happy Mother's Day as he snatched her 7-year-old daughter away. Happy Mother's Day. Oh, yes, there will be trials. Impeachment isn't the only thing that will be on the table this time, Nancy. Let's be clear. And law enforcement agencies across America are canceling contracts with ICE over Trump's family separation policies. Not everybody wants to be a good German, now do they? After the break, we move to the chef's table, where the real story behind Trump's pardon of the white militia Oregon ranchers is to cover up his campaign to hand over wilderness areas to mining companies. I think a few drilling companies, too. I think they're in the mix. And in U.S. Senate elections, people of color count as about 3/4 of a person. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Bon appetit. Go to the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the rightish of the page is the chat room link, monitored by Kelly Link and Roaring Girl, who will be at Netroots Nation this year. So say hi to her. And I think she's going to be at a few symposiums and talks, so that would be good. And she might even catch you in the hallways for a question or two. So look out for that. Arliss Bunny is going to be there as well. I'm not sure if Will is going to be there, but I know Arliss will. And so she might catch you in the hallways, or I don't know, even in the hotel rooms where they have events and whatnot, gatherings, and ask you a few as well. So like to hear from you. Alrighty. To the leftish of the chat room link are the contribute donate buttons, and we're in the process of updating those. So thank you for your patience and generosity. We are unable to do this without you. You can follow Netroots Radio on Twitter at Netroots Radio. And we're also on Facebook. And I'm getting weird stuff from Facebook about that I had to review the page, or they're going to take it away or something. I can't figure out what that's all about. So I'm looking into that. And like I said, Facebook does what Facebook wants to do when they do it. And we are really just microscopic organisms, better left unseen by the great Facebook God. And they will do what they do. You can follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam, and I'm on Daily Co's as Justice Putnam, and that is where the show notes and links are posted about 10 minutes before showtime. So do check that out. A little bit of entertaining value, we hope, uplifting, a little bit of literature, a little bit of photography and whatnot. But most importantly, those are where the links are for the source material for the show. And that's an important part. So, that way you can find out where I've riffed. In this reporter's opinion, as I like to say. Let's see. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, on Facebook as West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Got that one down there. That's always good. And you can find podcasts of the show on iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, TuneIn, etc., etc., etc. Well, let's take a look real quick here about what's going on with... Now, I heard that Trump was about 35 minutes late to the NATO summit meeting today. He somehow he prompted or caused an emergency session to be called. Then he gave an impromptu half an hour plus diatribe. They call it a speech. And then he flew off to London. I don't know. He's trying. He has to hurry up so he can go talk to Vlad. He's got these other things, and I love how even the left is upset about this baby Trump blimp balloon that is going to fly in London. I mean, give me a break. That's like Tomi Lahren whining that, they're reduced to heckling. No, we're not reduced to heck. If we're going, it's just another arrow in our quiver. It's just another tool in our pouch. Heckling, we're not reduced to heckling. It's, the difference between a standard and a Phillips screwdriver. You need both. And you also need a vise. Maybe some vice grips. Those are always nice. Lockjaw. lockjaw vice grips. I love those. And a few other things, maybe even a circular or radial saw, a reciprocal saw, and I don't know, a chop saw too. You gotta have a chop saw. Jigsaw. Gotta have a jigsaw as well. So we have many tools. We're the Democratic part of the political spectrum. We aren't just, black and white. Okay? We're all the colors of the rainbow, and that's what makes it so frightening, doesn't it? Oh, yes, indeed. Well, here we go. I do really want to follow Strzok, and if you're listening to the show right now in real time, and when the show is broadcast, don't worry. Strzok will be there all day. Yes, he is in a hearing. Ostensibly is. And I don't know if the Republicans really want him to open up in open session. They did 11 hours with him in closed session, and now they think they can bring him out in public, and they'll see how he had it in for Donald Trump. Well, you know what? Of course he had it in for Donald Trump. This is the number one counterintelligence guy for the FBI. He had it in for Trump because of what he knew, not because of who Trump is. Though that's part of it. Have you ever met a cop that really loved the suspect they're trying to bring in? Have you ever met a cop? I mean, geez, Les Miserables was all about Javert, who couldn't just give up. Right? Have you ever known a cop to not have a bias against who they're trying to get? Huh? Oh, I know. There's like cinematic buddy movies like Heat, where the good and bad guy, have this at least grudging respect for each other, if not filial or brotherly love, because they're so close to what they do. It's just, it's black and white to them, right? There's no nuance there. But Peter Strzok, I think he's like a punk. He's not a hippie. That's the problem, is that the right wing think that we as Democratic liberals or whatever, and Strzok is not a Democratic liberal, let's be clear, but he's assigned that position. So they think he's a hippie, a cream puff. No, he's a punk, and punks kick back. Okay? Let's be clear. And I wouldn't even call him a punk. He's a cop. And he's not only a cop. It looks like he's a good cop. One with a little bit of a punk streak in him, and they kick back. Oh, yes. Let's get to the stories that we have for you today. I could just go on and on and on. In fact, I have. Darn it. Thought I'd fill you in on a few things, and the next thing you know, the show's almost over. Well, separating immigrant families has been one of the great acts of American generosity. Yes, generosity to the right-wing racist. They've been asking for that for decades, and they're finally getting it. Rebecca and Tralgo from Think Progress put this together the same day. The federal government missed a court-imposed deadline to reunite roughly 84 children under the age of 5 with their families after being forcibly separated from them at the U.S.-Mexico border, and they were not illegals. They came here under asylum and presented themselves, but now we're just going to call them illegals. See how it works? Mm-hmm. Secretary of Health and Human Services, Alex Azar, appeared on CNN to defend how his agency has handled the recent immigration crisis. We have nothing to hide about how we operate these facilities. He said, referring to juvenile and tender age facilities in which many of the separated children are currently being detained. Tender age. Baby prisons. And he told that to Wolf Blitzer. And Wolf Blitzer's a war correspondent, so he knows about this stuff. Human shields, the whole thing. Speaking to the conditions in which their children are being held, he added, "It is one of the great acts of American generosity and charity, and we're doing these for the unaccompanied kids." Azar appeared to be using an incorrect term for children forcibly removed from their families at the border. Typically, the term unaccompanied refers to those children who arrive at the border alone or without a parent or guardian present. The act of separating 3,000 children from their parents, that's the latest estimate that HHS is given here for the number of minors in their care, is hardly generous. As many experts have noted, doing so can be deeply traumatic for the child and can cause long-lasting damage to their mental health. Well, if they don't have long-lasting damage to their mental health, how can you blame them for being MS-13? We've assured that we can now demonize these kids because obviously they've been damaged, and that damage is going to cause them to lash out at who damaged them. And as soon as they get a tattoo, and maybe even before. Okay. Well, in The Godfather, they did try to kill Don Corleone because they were afraid he was going to come back. He's just a little kid. And they were right. So maybe Don and his mobsters know a little bit something more than we know. I mean, maybe we need to get some lamb's blood splattered on our door so we'll be safe. Because it sounds to me like firstborns are up next. Okay. Well, one of the great acts of generosity. HHS has spent millions placing immigrant children into abusive homes, and some of the tender age facilities where the youngest children separated at the border are sent have faced allegations of sexual and physical abuse over the years. A Think Progress investigation, for instance, found that a shelter for unaccompanied minors contracted by HHS currently employs a man with a history of sex crimes, and the shelter has also taken in children separated at the border. Eric Ballert of Share Blue Media penned this next offering here at the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. When Hannah Arendt wrote The Banality of Evil, she had ascribed that particular psychological defect to those who seemed very normal. It could also be ascribed not just to Goebbels or Goering or any of those types, but to, the conductor driving the train that took Jews to the death camps, to the ovens. And so it was banal. They were just doing their job. But then the Nuremberg trials showed that it wasn't just banality. There was a lot of people who took glee in what they did. And when there are trials, I think those who took glee in tormenting these innocents should be held to high account. On the day the Trump administration failed to reunite children under the age of 5 who have been ripped from their parents at the border, new details have emerged about the cruel and heartless way government officials have been separating families this year. Carrying out Trump's zero-tolerance crusade, members of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement have mocked, taunted, and belittled traumatized families who cross the border, many of them seeking legal asylum from gang violence. Some of the agents' behavior borders on sadistic. During a conversation, one of the officers asked this one mother, who they held in cages, do they celebrate Mother's Day in Guatemala? And she said, I answered yes. Then, Happy Mother's Day, because the next Sunday was Mother's Day, she testified. I lowered my head so that my daughter would not see the tears forming in my eyes, and they took her away. She added, that particular act of cruelty astonished me then, as it does now. Happy Mother's Day. The chilling first-hand accounts are detailed in a new Rolling Stone article and are based on court records released as part of state litigation against the Trump administration for breaking up these families. And there's more testimonials here in this article, so do go look at it, the show notes and links. The Department of Health and Human Services claims 34 of the 102 children will be reunited with their families by the end of the day on, well, now it's going to be next Tuesday, they're saying. But at the time of that announcement, only 4 of the very young children have been given back to their parents. Meanwhile, ICE agents continue to attack traumatized families, and the Trump White House continues to show callous disregard for their suffering. In fact, Trump came out and said, the solution to this is don't come here. No brown people allowed for any reason. But you do have Russian birth tourists coming here, specifically to have kids so that they can have dual citizenship. No apparent clamp down on that. Because Russia is white utopia, after all. Penned this next offering also, and he's from Share Blue Media. 3 California law enforcement agencies have now canceled contracts with ICE due to Trump's inhumane policies. The Contra Costa County Sheriff's Department this week became California's 3rd law enforcement agency to cut ties with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement as Trump's inhumane zero-tolerance crusade continues to spark a nationwide backlash. Across the state, ICE contracts with several jails and prisons to house nearly 4,000 people facing deportation. But Contra Costa County Sheriff David Livingston announced on Tuesday that his county will cancel its contract with ICE, due in part to the rising cost of dealing with community protests. Blame it on the protesters. I like that. Okay, managing protests in Richmond have become expensive and time-consuming for our staff. Really? Well, I don't know. There were protests when the Chevron refinery poisoned the community. I mean, I'm not saying that Contra Costa County should continue their contracts with ICE, but they didn't blame, not patrolling Richmond because of protests over the Chevron refinery poisoning the community with a poisonous gas on any number of occasions. I'm just saying. But when you have to make sure that you don't get any blowback, you're going to couch it in some way. I just think this is a Weasley way of doing it. But not all of these law enforcement agencies are following Contra Costa's lead for the reason. They actually think that what is going on is heartless and they don't want to have anything to do with it. So good on them. And looks like Texas, a couple of communities in Texas are doing the same. And a few other states as well. And so, if you can't abolish ICE, cancel their contract. All right, let's get to our break. We'll come back and go through weather from around the world, and then we're going to finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, a decent follow-up. Sicario, Day of the Soldado isn't exactly a sequel to its 2015 predecessor. Rather, it's more of a spin-off. The original director, Denis Villeneuve, is gone, as is Emily Blunt's character, Kate, but Benicio del Toro and Josh Brolin are back to reprise their roles as morally ambiguous government agents whose jobs revolve around the endless cycle of drug war and human trafficking violence at the U.S.-Mexico border. The story here is that Washington, after a terrorist attack in Kansas City, becomes convinced that the Mexican cartels have gone into business smuggling dangerous terrorists into the U.S. This causes the government to label the former as terrorists as well. By being labeled this way, the legal theory is that the government can then bend the rules to better deal with the situation. What actually happens, though, is that any rules at all are more or less thrown to the wind. A decision is made that a viable course of action would be to kidnap the young daughter of a powerful cartel leader and then blame it on a rival cartel, forcing the two into an all-out war with each other. What could possibly go wrong? The kidnapping of the young teen Isabella goes as planned, but the mission quickly goes off the rails with Del Toro's character becoming the protector of Isabella, despite the fact that her father's cartel had cost him just about everything in the first film. While Sicario, Day of the Soldado offers some thrills and stark scenes of the human side of the current border mayhem, this episode's director, Stefano Solima's approach is more towards heavy-handed action-adventure and less about moral nuance, causing the film to fall short of the original. But decent acting and tight editing keep it from becoming the violent slog that it could have easily become. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our page on YouTube.
Scott Pruitt was essentially head of the Pollution Protection Agency.
While we were out, EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt forced to resign. But his replacement...
There are a lot of insiders who think he could actually be even more effective than Pruitt was because he is so low-key.
Spells bad news for the environment and public health. Starbucks joins the global movement to end plastic pollution, plus...
Temperatures soar well into the triple digits, up 25 degrees above normal.
Extreme temperatures shatter all-time heat records around the world.
All of those records shattered and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Besides being the greatest scam artist I've ever seen, I mean, I really think Scott Pruitt might be 3 raccoons under a trench coat.
This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, finally, Scott Pruitt, EPA chief, pushed out of his job. It's incredible that it took this long.
Yeah, scandal-plagued Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Scott Pruitt resigned on Friday amid a growing wave of corruption investigations into his questionable ethics, his lavish spending, his potential violations of federal record-keeping and whistleblower protection laws, and abuse of his office for personal gain.
To be clear, he didn't resign. He was fired. They let him pretend that he resigned.
Well, he pretended pretty well in a fawning and servile resignation letter to Trump. He expressed zero remorse for his avalanche of scandals and instead portrayed himself as the victim of, quote, unrelenting attacks. Despite Pruitt's departure, the numerous probes into his ethics, spending, and management will continue.
Good. Lock him up.
For the record, the corporate media really only covered Pruitt because of his rampant corruption, which has been epic, to be sure, but not so much for his dismantling of pollution regulations. Apparently, making America sick and polluted again is just not as sexy as scandal. But don't worry, on his way out, Pruitt gave Americans a parting gift of more pollution and more cancer. On his last day, he issued a big loophole for so-called glider trucks. These are refurbished, super polluting long-haul trucks, and exempted them from air pollution and emissions laws. Pruitt based the exemption for glider trucks on a discredited study funded by a major glider truck manufacturer. And Politico reports that Pruitt's EPA has suppressed an agency health assessment containing serious warnings about the toxic chemical formaldehyde, declaring that most Americans inhale enough formaldehyde vapor from everyday products in their daily lives to put them at risk of developing leukemia, cancers, and other illnesses. EPA sources say that delaying the report's release is in part an attempt to undermine the agency's only independent research unit that tracks the toxic health impacts of chemicals.
And so what about his replacement, Andrew Wheeler, an actual coal industry lobbyist? Will he be any better?
Well, unfortunately, no. Pruitt's current replacement is unlikely to be an improvement. As you mentioned, acting EPA Administrator Andrew Wheeler is a former coal industry lobbyist and a longtime Washington insider. He's also dedicated to Trump's anti-regulatory agenda. And because of his experience on Capitol Hill, Wheeler is likely to be more effective than Pruitt at carrying out environmental rollbacks that can withstand court challenges.
Careful what you wish for, Scott Pruitt opponents.
Meanwhile, global warming intensified heat waves shattered all-time high heat records across the northern hemisphere, from North America to Europe to Africa and Russia. Just a sampling. Burbank, California recorded a blistering new all-time hottest temperature of 114 degrees. Denver, Colorado saw an all-time high record of 105 degrees.
Denver, the mile-high city, it got to 105?
Yes.
Wow.
In Quebec, Canada, at least 70 people died due to extreme heat. And most astonishing is the new heat record set in northern Siberia, where temperatures topped 90 degrees Fahrenheit.
In Siberia.
In Siberia.
Wow.
In Japan, extreme record rainfall has triggered deadly flash floods and landslides, killing more than 100 people. Now, these all-time heat and rainfall records are all in line with climate scientists' predictions that global warming will bring more frequent and intense extreme weather events.
Don't tell Scott Pruitt or his replacement Andrew Wheeler.
Finally, a bit of good news. Starbucks announced on Monday that it will phase out use of plastic straws at all of its stores by 2020. And switch instead to new recyclable strawless lids and straws made from biodegradable materials. Starbucks already made the switch in Seattle after that city recently implemented a new ban on plastic straws.
Well, suck it up, Starbucks fans. And Starbucks, why are you waiting until 2020? For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Steve Mirsky.
The general public, if you look at the broad numbers, it's like 60% of vineyards around the world in the New World have been planted with just 5 or 6 varieties of grapes in the last 10 or 20 years, from the Australians to New Zealand to, of course, all of California.
Science journalist Kevin Begos, the author of the new book Tasting the Past, The Science of Flavor and the Search for the Origins of Wine. He spoke in June at Astor Wines and Spirits in Manhattan. At one point, he talked about disease threats to wine grapes.
So the scientists are starting to get really concerned that this is setting up a perfect scenario for a grape pandemic, which would seem a little far-fetched, except we all know that grapes are being reproduced by cuttings, not by seed. to keep the flavor qualities. What that means is they haven't been evolving for hundreds or thousands of years. If Pinot is 2,000 years old, which is kind of the general estimate, since we've been cloning it to keep the flavors for roughly 2,000 years, all the insects and pathogens and mildews that attack grapevines have been evolving that whole time. They always figure out new ways to attack the grapevines. Wine grape researchers at the leading institutions are saying, look, you're doing the exact same thing they did during the Irish potato famine, which was plant the same variety of potato all over Ireland, propagate it just from buds, from the shoots coming out of old potatoes. And then when, a fungus hit it, it wipes out the whole population. So these are not just hypotheticals. So I don't want to be unduly alarmist, because this could be 50 years down the road. It could be 100 years down the road.
Or it could be prevented, because other grapes, which have not been popular for wide-scale winemaking, have kept evolving, and some of these have natural disease resistance. Crossing these wine grape varieties with more popular ones could head off a pandemic before it happens. You can hear more of Kevin Bigos' talk about wine on an upcoming episode of the long-form Scientific American podcast, Science Talk. For Scientific American's 60 Second Science, I'm Steve Mirsky.
Welcome to 60 Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. Civic participation means taking part in formal political processes and taking part in community activities outside of government. Millions of Americans participate in thousands of voluntary organizations and associations. These organizations seek to improve the life of the community in many different ways. Some benefit the poor, sick, or elderly people. Other organizations are concerned with the environment, healthcare, or the needs of children. They deal with many other community problems and issues. Participating in these organizations gives community members the means to deal with community issues. It also allows them to participate in the way organizations are run. Government must deal with some matters, such as arresting lawbreakers or establishing rules for building safety. However, there are other issues where government works with voluntary organizations to solve community problems. In other cases, voluntary organizations act by themselves to address community issues. That's all for today's podcast, 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
You can help stop the Trump agenda in its tracks. Make sure you're registered to vote. Go to rockthevote.org. And on November 6th, vote for Democrats up and down the ticket. This message, a public service from all the fine people of netrootsradio.com.
From Riga, Latvia, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 minutes. President Trump painted NATO allies as delinquent on Wednesday for underspending on defense.
If you go back 10 or 20 years, you'll just add it all up. It's massive amounts of money is owed.
There are no NATO spending requirements. Instead, Trump wants them to fulfill a voluntary pledge to set aside 2% of GDP to defense, a target just 5 of 28 members have hit.
It's perfectly true that European allies need to spend more on defense.
Sir Adam Thompson directs the European Leadership Network and served as Britain's representative to NATO from 2014 to 2016.
Believe me, they've heard Donald Trump. What they need help on is spending effectively rather than spending more.
But that wasn't a Trump talking point. Instead, he called for doubling the spending target to 4% of GDP. His other barb was directed at Germany over construction of a natural gas pipeline with Russia.
Germany is totally controlled by Russia because they were getting from 60 to 70% of their energy from Russia and a new pipeline. And you tell me if that's appropriate, because I think it's not.
Thompson says the pipeline is controversial, but
to discuss the issue publicly in a way that suggests that Chancellor Merkel, of all people, raised in East Germany, is somehow totally controlled by Russia is not the best way, I would say, of getting the results you want from your friends and allies.
Of course, NATO isn't all ruins, as the allies signed a pledge warning of Russia recommitting to common defense and agreeing to increased spending. But if Trump stays focused on dollar figures or holds the entire alliance accountable for individual actions, NATO could remain a top Trump target for years.
It's hard to measure success when success is measured in absence of something, absence of conflict, absence of sovereignty being undermined.
Luke Vargas, Riga, Latvia.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. A little bit of jambalaya. A little bit of spice in your life. No Old Bay in this dish. Nope, that's for a different kind of shrimp broil. Okay? You may boil it, or you may broil it, but it's Old Bay. But jambalaya, completely different experience. Oh, my. Okay, well, weather from around the world always begins along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 68 degrees. Ouch! And we're going to be, how the Weather Underground puts it, much warmer than yesterday, because we will be forecast about 105 to 110 in the shade. So can you imagine what it's like on the hot rocks? Ooh, baby. Okay, well, stay hydrated. Get that sunscreen on, no matter what Darla Shine says. Sunscreen is a hoax. Oh, my God. Okay, I know a lot of surfers who thought it was a hoax, too. And you know what? They're dead from having melanomas appear on their skin, specifically on the bridge of their nose, and then they just decayed away. A hoax. Thank you, ma'am. Yes, indeed. So, we are not only going to be much warmer, dry conditions will continue. Of course they will. Grass pollen is high. I have no data on air quality, though I presume that when we had some readings a couple of days ago when it was just about into the moderate range from good, it's in that same area. I did smell a little bit of wood smoke from forest fires from afar, and that will always bring the air quality, down. Not so good. But, of course, the daytime UV index remains very high at 9, as it has for, well, a couple of months now. Okay, so it looks like pressure dropped just a tad to 28.88 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles. Humidity currently is at 67%, but will drop to below 21% in a few hours. Winds are negligible right now out of the west-southwest at 1 mile per hour, will be increasing to their normal range, shifting then out of the north-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour, and will remain so until tomorrow. And then it'll be out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Okay, weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property. And these people positively live around the world. Okay, London is 75 and partly cloudy, and they have a weather advisory. I think it's for orange Trump baby balloons flying in the London sky. Oh, no. No, they have a heat advisory. 75 and partly cloudy. They're going to be humid also. But there is a Trump balloon flying. Thank you, Sadiq. Paris is 77 and fair. Rome is 85 and fair. Kiev is 84 and fair. Kabul is 87 and fair. Hong Kong is 79 degrees with light rain. Tokyo is 80 degrees and mostly cloudy, and they also have a heat advisory. And so take care if you're in Tokyo. Let's see. Oh, Sydney, Australia is 48 degrees and clear. Of course, it is, pretty much their winter now. All right. different hemisphere. San Francisco, California is 56 degrees and cloudy. And New York, New York is 76 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Pike brings us this first offering here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays, folks. That's right. Shrimp and grits. I love it. I love barley, too. You should have some barley. Put barley in your stew. You don't have to put rice. It's really good. It's easy, too. Try it. Come on. Well, Trump is fanning a culture war by pardoning these white supremacist secessionists, the Hammonds. I just love the funny aspect that the outcry was when the Hammonds were recharged with the mandatory minimums that the right-wing white supremacists just say have to be imposed on anybody who's black, brown, Asian, whatever, as long as they're not white. Especially those who, are white supremacist secessionists like the Hammonds. But he's using this pardon here out in the West to cover up his true intentions, and that's, he and Zinke want to hand over federal lands and wilderness areas to mining and drilling interests. Not a secret, but that's what he's trying to do. So until Tuesday's announcement, Dwight and Stephen Hammond had been serving out 5-year terms in federal prison. Now, they're father and son, not brothers. The brothers are the Bundys, okay, and their dad. So the sentences had been widely condemned as overly harsh for the underlying conduct. A series of intentional fires lit by the Hammonds on either side of the line between their Oregon property and lands belonging to the American people. Alan Pike, now he does bring up the fact that the Hammonds had also been charged and fined for setting a forest fire on fire to cover up their poaching, though they didn't know, they being Bureau of Land Management and others did not know at the time that they had poached 100 deer, only that the fire had been started and endangered firefighters in the area. And then they were also charged and made to pay a fine for setting backfires in which firefighters in the area's lives were endangered. And then this final one was just an out-and-out FU. And that was what they went to jail for. It was a cumulative effect of all of these other actions up to this point. And then, later on, we find out that one of the earlier fires in which they had set a whole forest fire on fire to cover up 100 deer, over 100 deer that they had poached. That is who Trump pardoned. And so some people say, oh, no, it's just too harsh. All they did was set their forest fires on fire. What? I can't. There's a kid right now teenager who was having fun with fireworks on a walk up the Columbia River Gorge that caused a fire to start. And I think his parents are on the lam for about $10 million, maybe more. Well, you never know. So Trump is positioned to give his base another pep rally-sized dose of his own, the libs' pugnacity, one big enough to distract from the president's own efforts to sell off protected wilderness to destructive mining and gas profiteers. I'm sorry, we don't normally use the P word. I meant Trump. The Obama administration's public land officials spent much time and energy defraying those tensions, instituting a newly inclusive and locally rooted process for generating land management policies that better reflect input from the people who live and work on and near taxpayer-owned wilderness. Though bureaucratic details like public comment periods and open meeting rules may seem entirely divorced from a high desert arson and gunplay story, the two are actually braided tightly together. Trump has aggressively undermined the Obama land management reforms. See, anything the black guy did has to be undone. This is all he knows from Vlad. And now he's going to sit down with him. Oh, and would the President of the United States, on just another issue here, as we sum up on this story, would a President of the United States go to NATO and proclaim that he's a very stable genius? Yes. Yes, he did.
Danser maintenant sous l'été, les pieds nus dans le sable. Danser maintenant et jeter vos ennuis dans les vagues qui dansent.
Ian Melheiser brings us this last offering here at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Chef Tables. Looks like America's House of Lords is about to decide the future of the Supreme Court. Ian Melheiser from Think Progress, of course. The U.S. Senate is an immoral, anti-democratic institution where a person from Wyoming counts as over 68 Californians. It is also a demographic time bomb that is likely to plunge the U.S. into a legitimacy crisis. According to Barrack College's David Birdsell, by 2040, about 70% of Americans are expected to live in the 15 largest states. That means that 30% of the population will elect 70% of the senators. It also means that if small states continue to trend towards Republicans, the GOP may soon have a permanent Senate majority that is large enough to remove the President of the United States from office at will. Elect another black guy or a black woman, and oh yeah, they'll be going to jail. That's right. More than 2 decades before this time bomb detonates, the Senate is one of the most anti-democratic bodies in any modern democracy. As a new essay by the University of New Hampshire's Michael Ettlinger lays out, the Senate effectively gives extra voting power to white people, gun owners, and rural voters while treating people of color as only slightly more than 3/4 of a person. Thanks to Senate malapportionment, in other words, the average white voter counts as nearly 1.7 Latinos. This underrepresentation occurs because almost 2/3 of Latinos live in the 5 largest states. Ettlinger's essay is chock full of data on just how much the Senate skews representation. Under the Constitution, now remember, each state gets exactly 2 senators, regardless of whether that state has 100 people or 100 million people. The average state has a population of 6.5 million, Ettlinger explains, making the average American one of 6.5 million constituents for each of their 2 senators. Meanwhile, California has nearly 40 million residents. Wyoming has less than 580,000 people. Or to put it another way, a Californian counts as less than 1/5 of the average American. I say that's a feature, not a bug. While a person from Wyoming counts as more than 10 people. Well, of course. They're put there by God, of course. This sham democracy has profound implications for the upcoming battle over the Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. Currently, Republicans hold 51 votes in the Senate, while the Democratic caucus is only 49 senators. Yet, the Democratic minority represents nearly 40 million more people than the Republican majority. And if you don't know how that works, I'll give you 2 words: Merrick Garland. See? If Kavanaugh gets the Supreme Court, he is likely to put an even bigger thumb on America's electoral scales, making it even harder for a majority of voters to remove the GOP from power. And all this is possible because of a system that gives white people more representation than people of color. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period. I'm sorry, I should have left you on a much brighter note, but I guess we could move to the rural areas and turn them blue. Yeah, we could. All right, we're, there's breaking news. Strzok is testifying as I speak and has been for about an hour, ostensibly, and we'll check into that and give you a little bit more on that tomorrow. And tomorrow is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. So stay tuned to Netroots Radio for more breaking news throughout the day, and we will visit with you tomorrow in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.